Hey everyone. Ever feel like history lessons sort of skipped over some really interesting figures? Well, buckle up, because today we're taking a deep dive into John the Baptist. And trust me, there's way more to him than just the baptism guy.
You got that right. And get this. Our source material is a discussion between Alex O'Connor and a Dr. James McGrath, who's actually written not one, but two whole books about John the Baptist.
2 books. Whoa, okay. Clearly we're missing something here. I mean, we all know the basics, right?
Yep.
Desert prophet, hanging out in the Jordan River, baptizing folks, even Jesus himself. But it sounds like this Dr. McGrath is unearthing a whole lot more.
He is, and one of the most interesting things is that even back then, during John the Baptist's own time, people weren't quite sure what to make of him. It wasn't just this straightforward precursor to Jesus' situation.
So not everyone saw him as just like the opening act for Jesus. Some people thought he was the main event.
Exactly. And that's where the Gospel of John gets really interesting. It goes out of its way to say that John the Baptist was not the light, just a witness to Jesus, the true light, you know?
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like some ancient theological shade throwing. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So if they're so adamant about putting John the Baptist in his place, does that mean there were groups who actually thought he was a messianic figure? Or even a rival to Jesus?
You hit the nail on the head. Dr. McGrath even suggests there might have been whole communities who saw John that way, maybe even equal to Jesus. That makes you wonder, were there folks who followed John the Baptist and never actually followed Jesus?
Whoa, that totally flips the script. Like, we've been told one version of the story, and now we're finding out there might be a whole other side to it.
You got it. And one group that gives us a totally different view is the Mandaeans.
The Mandaeans. Gotta be honest, that's a new one for me. Need some background on them.
Well, that's what makes them so fascinating. They're a Gnostic sect. And get this, they still exist today.
Seriously?
Yeah, like a direct link to ancient Gnosticism. They're the only surviving community from that whole era, which makes them super valuable for understanding that period of religious history.
Hold on. Just for those of us who haven't cracked open a book on ancient religious movements lately, what exactly is Gnosticism again?
All right, so imagine this kind of underground movement in the early centuries AD. They had a whole different take on the Bible and God, you know? Like, a lot of Gnostics believe that the creator of the material world, the one we usually think of as the God from the Old Testament, was, well, not exactly a good deity.
So they weren't big fans of the material world then?
Not really, no. They saw it as like a trap for the soul. They thought true freedom came from getting special knowledge, gnosis.
That's definitely a clash with the usual Jewish and Christian view.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It wasn't about rules and traditional worship for them. It was all about seeking inner knowledge, escaping this material world.
Okay, got it. So we've got these Mandaeans, they're Gnostics, and what's the connection to John the Baptist?
Here's where it gets wild. Their most revered prophet, the guy they hold above all others, is John the Baptist.
No way. They put John the Baptist above Jesus. That's crazy.
Yep. And get this, their main religious texts. They were written in Aramaic. It's actually thanks to Dr. McGrath's work that we have the first full English translations of them.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. You're telling me there's this whole other way of looking at John the Baptist, coming from this ancient Gnostic group, and we're only just now getting their writings. Incredible.
It really is. And the Mandaeans give us a completely different lens to view John the Baptist through, you know? Remember how the Gospel of John seemed so focused on downplaying him? Well, the Mandaeans show us a world where John's teachings might have thrived on their own, totally separate from Jesus. They don't see him as just a forerunner, but as a major figure in his own right.
So what you're saying is John the Baptist might have been leading a huge religious movement, completely apart from what eventually became Christianity.
Precisely. And to understand that movement, we got to dive into Mandaean beliefs.
All right, let's do it. What can you tell us about what they believed and how it connected to their reverence for John the Baptist?
Well, for the Mandaeans, John the Baptist, he kind of embodies their core belief in ritual cleansing and spiritual liberation. It's like, imagine baptism not as just this one-time thing, but something you do all the time, like a spiritual reset button. That's how important it is to them.
So it's not about, like, washing away sins, like in some Christian traditions. What's the point of all these baptisms for them?
It's about purification, connecting with the divine. Remember, they're Gnostics, right? So they see this material world as kind of flawed, even corrupt. And through these repeated baptisms, they think they can cleanse themselves of that, you know, get closer to the realm of light and true knowledge.
Right, makes sense with their worldview. And you mentioned they reject those big figures from Jewish and Christian traditions like Moses and Jesus. Is that tied to their Gnostic beliefs too?
Absolutely. They see figures like Moses as representing that flawed creator God, and the systems of control they believe he put on humanity. For them, true freedom comes from within, from gnosis, not from rules or authorities.
So by rejecting Moses and Jesus, they're basically rejecting the idea of a single, all-powerful God who makes all the rules.
Yeah, kinda. They believe true power is in individual spiritual growth, seeking knowledge, not just blindly obeying.
Sounds almost like a very individualistic way of looking at spirituality.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
But they also have this strong sense of community, shared practices. They have these amazing texts full of myths and stories about angels and demons and celestial realms. And they believe that by following these rituals and teachings passed down, they can help each other reach spiritual liberation.
It's fascinating how they created this whole system of beliefs and practices outside of the mainstream religions, right? And kept it going for centuries. Says a lot about how dedicated they are.
It really does. They've been persecuted a lot throughout history, but they've held on to their traditions, even practiced in secret sometimes. Dr. McGrath really emphasizes that they're not just some historical footnote. They're a living example of how diverse and resilient human belief can be.
Yeah. It's easy to think about religion in very black and white terms, but the Mandaeans show how fluid and complex it really is.
Exactly. It's not just a straight line. There are all these side paths, these offshoots, and the Mandaeans are proof of that.
Okay, so we've talked about their reverence for John the Baptist, rejecting Moses and Jesus, the importance of those ritual cleansings. But what about the afterlife? What do they believe happens when you escape this material world?
They believe in a kind of ascent, a journey through these celestial realms, going back to the realm of light. They see it as purification and enlightenment, the soul shedding its material stuff, reconnecting with its true spiritual essence.
So it's not just about escaping this world, but this continuous journey towards spiritual perfection.
Exactly. And this idea of the soul's true essence, that's where another interesting Mandaean belief comes in celestial counterparts.
Celestial counterparts. Okay, now that sounds interesting. What are those?
Imagine, like, each of us has this perfect spiritual twin living in the realm of light, like our soul's best self, free from all the limitations and imperfections of this material world.
So like a spiritual soulmate or something.
You could think of it that way, and the goal for Mandaeans is to reunite with that counterpart, to be spiritually whole.
It's a beautiful concept. Makes me think of some of those ideas in mystical traditions about finding your true self, connecting with your higher purpose.
Yeah, it resonates with those ideas. And for the Mandaeans, John the Baptist, he's like a key guide on that journey. They believe his teachings show the way to spiritual liberation, that reunion with our celestial counterpart.
Okay, I gotta ask, do they have any specific stories or teachings about John the Baptist that kind of show these beliefs?
They do, and it's so interesting how they've woven him into their own mythology. Like, they have stories about him meeting celestial beings, getting secret knowledge, revealing the true path to salvation.
It's amazing to think that this figure we mainly connect to Christianity is so important in this totally different religion.
It is. Really shows how fluid and interconnected religious ideas can be. Makes you think outside those neat categories we put on history.
Right. We think of religions as these separate things, but the Mandaeans remind us there's a lot of overlap, shared roots,
Yeah.
like a web of influences.
Exactly. And by following those threads, looking at these less traveled paths, we can get a much richer understanding of religious history and how humans search for meaning.
This whole thing with the Mandaeans brings up something really important about sources. We keep talking about Dr. McGrath's work, but before his translations, nobody who spoke English could really access these Mandaean texts. Makes you wonder how much we're missing, how many other perspectives are out there waiting to be found.
Makes you think, right? Really highlights how important ongoing scholarship is and the need to keep questioning what we think we know. After all, history is always being rewritten. As new stuff comes up, new voices are heard.
For sure. And sometimes those voices come from the most unexpected places. Who would have thought this small, kind of overlooked Gnostic sect would have these crucial insights into John the Baptist?
Shows you there's always more to learn, more layers to uncover. That's what keeps history so fascinating.
Okay, so we've gone pretty deep on Mandaean beliefs, but let's circle back to John the Baptist. What does all this mean for how we understand him? Was he really this radical figure preaching a form of Gnosticism like Dr. McGrath suggests?
That's a question scholars are still debating, to be honest. And it's important to remember the Mandaeans' view is just one interpretation. We don't have anything written by John the Baptist himself, so we have to rely on these other sources, different interpretations.
Like trying to put together a puzzle with some pieces missing.
Yeah, exactly. We can look at the Gospels, what we know about the history, the Mandaean perspective. Each piece adds to the picture, but we might never have the whole thing.
But even without a definite answer, this has definitely changed the way I thought about John the Baptist. He was clearly a lot more complex and influential than I realized.
He was, and I think that's a key takeaway for everyone listening. Don't be afraid to question the simple stories. Dig a little deeper, look at different points of view, embrace the complexity. You might be surprised what you find.
Totally agree. It's all about being open to the mystery, and continuing to explore.
And sometimes those explorations lead to the most unexpected, fascinating discoveries, like finding an ancient Gnostic sect that reveres John the Baptist above everyone else. Who knew?
Right. It makes you wonder what other hidden gems are out there, just waiting to be unearthed.
It does, and that sense of wonder, that's what keeps us coming back to history, right?
For sure. And that's what makes these deep dives so awesome. It's not just learning facts, it's about broadening our understanding of the world and how people try to make sense of it.
Well said. I think this deep dive has given us a lot to think about.
It has. So we've talked a lot about the Mandaeans, but what are some practical takeaways? How does understanding this alternative perspective change how we think about religion and spirituality today?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's so easy to get caught up in the history. But what does it all mean for us, like right now?
I think the Mandaeans really show us that there are always different ways of seeing things. The stories we hear about religion especially, they aren't always the only stories or even the right ones.
So it's about being more open-minded, not so stuck on the stories we've been told.
Yeah, exactly. The Mandaeans, with John the Baptist being so important, but Jesus not so much, they show that what we think is the right way, the mainstream way, is really just one view. And sometimes those other views, those different takes, can be super insightful.
It's like you've been using this map your whole life.
Yeah.
And then you realize, oh, it's just one map. There are other maps, other ways to get around. That's a great way to put it. And the Mandaeans, with their rituals, their belief in those celestial twins, their whole way of seeing the universe, it's like they have a completely different map for understanding what it means to be human.
And checking out those other maps, even if we don't switch over to them completely, it can help us see our own beliefs in a new way.
For sure. It's like you step outside your comfort zone and suddenly you realize there are other ways to live, to understand the world. And that can really push you to grow, to explore your own spirituality.
It's interesting how much of who we think we are, our whole identity, is tied to the stories we tell ourselves about where we came from. The Mandaeans, they kind of shake things up, right? With their whole take on those biblical figures and that focus on personal freedom, they make you question those stories.
Definitely. They make you ask, what if the stories we've always heard aren't the whole truth? What if there are other possibilities, other paths to finding meaning and purpose?
It's kind of scary, but also exciting, right? Like finding out your story isn't over yet. There are more chapters to write.
Exactly. The Mandaeans remind us that we have a choice in how those chapters go. We can stick to what we know, or we can be brave and explore new things, write our own stories.
That's where the real power is, right? Being open to the mystery, what we don't know, and realizing that finding new perspectives can totally change us.
Absolutely. The Mandaeans, they've fought for centuries to keep their traditions alive. They show that even the oldest, most hidden beliefs can still be important for us today.
Their resilience is amazing. It really makes you wonder, what other hidden treasures are out there just waiting to be found? What other voices from the past can teach us something about right now and about the future?
That's what's so great about history, right? It's an ongoing journey of exploration. The more you dig, the more you realize how much you don't know, how much there is to learn.
It's like peeling an onion, but there are always more layers underneath.
And each layer shows you something new, something that makes you question what you thought you knew, something that changes your understanding.
So bottom line for our listeners, what do we want them to take away from this deep dive?
I hope they leave with a sense of curiosity, a willingness to question things, and a desire to learn more. What other hidden religious groups are out there? What other figures from history should we be looking at with fresh eyes?
I love that. It's all about keeping that sense of wonder alive. Never stop questioning, never stop exploring. Who knows what amazing insights are waiting for us?
Exactly. The journey is the destination, right? And the Mandaeans, they've shown us that even the most unexpected paths can lead to truth.
So until next time, keep diving deep, keep those minds curious, and remember, there's always more to the story than meets the eye.